Oh yes, we're sinking our teeth into just how the supplementary elections were conducted over the weekend and perhaps in general how the 2019 general elections have gone. My first guest this morning is always a delight to have him around. He is Oke Ikechukwu. He's the Executive Director of Development Specs Academy and a Senior Fellow at the INEC Business School. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I think you were here shortly after the 2019 elections.
Yes.
Well, it was still 2019. It's not yet 2020, is it? But what I'm trying to say is immediately after the governorship elections, the one that everybody was preparing for, the supplementary elections, it would seem, have come as an extra. But they were done this weekend. After much ado, we saw court cases, some people going to court, and controversy as to whether or not people can actually go to court, you know, when the process is still on. But now it would seem that they've been largely concluded, largely because we still know about those court cases.
And those who will still go to tribunals.
And, of course, and those who will still go to tribunals, and we don't know what the outcomes will be in the tribunal. But what was your general assessment? I'm sure you must have been monitoring events over the weekend of the supplementary polls. What was your assessment? Were you impressed?
Not entirely. Not entirely, because one expected greater lessons would have been learned from the previous elections, the concerns about irregularity and so many other things. But a few things must be put in context. Number one, much of the blame being attributed to INEC is unfair. It is a regulatory body. It has no law enforcement capacities. And therefore, when the elections are exhaustively disrupted in places, ballot materials are taken, election materials are stolen and all of that, you first of all ask yourself about law and order. Because you find then that agents of INEC are themselves targets and vulnerable victims of that engagement. So there's the issue of national security, which undermine part of the regulatory process throughout the election system.
It's interesting you say that, because one of our guests put it this way. He says INEC is independent, but not really independent. When security is not within the purview of INEC, that it is not independent in that regard.
No, we can't create an army for INEC or a police. The point is that INEC determines its logistical needs,
yes,
and then the relevant security and authorities deploy personnel as suggested, proposed, and agreed upon with INEC. Now, that's where there is an issue. So when somebody speaks of independence, there's a question of independence in the area of decision-making and independence in managing logistics. The logistics INEC should and is by law supposed to manage is election logistics exclusive of what you might call supportive services, which includes security. So we can't speak of INEC as responsible for insecurity. That's unfair. But we can speak of INEC as not doing well enough if we find that you don't have election materials or that people deliberately colluded and the rest of it. So we need to disaggregate that. The organization was battered, and let's face it, it's an elite misconduct that is being retired on the head of an institution. Of course, the institution may have become complicit, but the fact of the matter is that behavior during elections is the outcome we're trying to. So backtracking to the supplementary elections, I think there were a lot of concerns about Kanu. There still are. The delays in Bauchi created a lot of discomfort because it didn't look like there was any justifiable reasons for delaying the process. Eventually, it got announced. That of Sokoto, of course, the combatants were many. You had predominantly two major political forces at play. Well, you have the Sultanate. The Sultan is a custodian, but Bafarawa and Wamako are the two, if you like, structures that are dominant in the place. And with the incumbent, with Bafarawa on the incumbent side and all of that, but these are matters of detail. You can see the narrow margin. That means that the governor of Sokoto State, who has been re-elected, now has a duty to do what no governor has done before him. Make everybody in Sokoto State believe in him, work together, disregard the camps, and work for the people, yeah.
Well, we sincerely hope that that is what all governors across board will be doing, I mean, regardless of what state they belong to. Because we've also seen extremely thin margins as well. In
some other places.
In some other places as well. I mean, look at even this margin in Kano, for instance, 1,033,000 to 1,024,000. And these are margins that our guests say need to be interrogated as to why it would seem that there were this thing. Is it about the political forces or that people do not believe that there is any difference between either of the two parties, so of the two major political parties. But you know, we'll come to that. Let's look at security, which calls to question the sincerity of, you know, our security forces, or is it the architecture, is it the makeup for elections that is making it seem like this? How come we recorded so many instances of violence for supplementary elections? One would have thought that this should be easy peasy, and you know, we shouldn't hear the kind of tales that we heard.
No, it's a matter of political desperation. Politicians are desperate. The first leg has gone. The presidential elections are out. And unfortunately for some, their elections didn't take place. So whatever mileage they expected to make, either from the presidential or the governorship election, was lost. So their own is now in a stranded territory to be run on its own. Now, being desperate, not particularly concerned about rule of law, and also with those as the only elections taking place, they could also recruit mischief makers from other states. In other words, if it's taking place in all the states at the same time, what it means is that you keep your thugs, I keep my thugs. But now it's a very limited number of places that are having elections. So it's like a boom season for thuggery. Across borders, that is one. Two, the security agencies, one would really say, looking at what transpired, how come you could have this level of violence in the supplementary elections when they were now a little more concentrated in those fewer areas, and when a lot of things could be anticipated? And in places where there was disruption, it began, lasted, and, you know, and went on. And one asks oneself, what's the monitoring mechanism? What's the containment mechanism? What kind of logistical conversations took place before these elections? Because the performance is really not very impressive in many places.
Would you say they too were tired?
Sorry?
Were they too tired? Were they, do you think that perhaps they had exhausted their strength as well as far as security was concerned? Or maybe they didn't think that the elections were, you know, going to be so violent, so to speak.
Well, if they were tired, I think they should first of all be ready, retired from service. If they didn't think that elections were going to be violent, that means they're incompetent. So a security, you can't say, tired of what? Fatigue on your job, then you're not on the job. My take is that possibly things that should not be taken for granted were taken for granted. Possibly, I wouldn't want to speak of complicity, but there's no explanation for many of the things we saw. Where disruptions commenced and went on and were in some cases nearly concluded. Where disruptions were attempted, sustained, but could not be concluded because of the mood of the people who said, no, we don't want it that way. There has to be a major conversation around security over these particular elections, because we've not come out from the presidential one, from what happened in River State and a lot of other places, and the number of deaths. That election recorded 50. This one that is in so few number of places would seem to have recorded more. There's no justification for it. And it will seem also that impunity and misconduct have become very attractive. In this election, they were. There was no indication of penalty for misconduct. You had people even walking more towards the very thing that marred the previous elections. It's not right. What you see is a devolution. I mean, the de-evolution. In other words, the democratic process is in reverse. Opportunities for free choice are being diminished by coercive agencies of desperate politicians. Now, the democratic culture is suffering because everybody involved is almost convinced that it really wouldn't matter in the end. So after the presidential elections and what happened, apathy came in, got worse this time, and that's how you de-democratize a nation. By making the people, not by what you say, but making them conclude that it doesn't really matter if I vote. That affected Anambra State for a very long time during the PDP years, because elections were mostly written. As in written, you knew nobody needed to vote. And so when the forces, the anti-democratic forces were shifting back, there was the extra job of convincing the people that you should come and vote, that it matters when you vote. That's what we are beginning to do on a national scale, where in sections of the country is a matter of, let's go, this is what we need to write. So the political consciousness is not there. The linkage between I'm voting for Maokwe because I expect her to do so and so. And the fact of her being in office, there's no linkage. So she gives me money, I vote and go home. And so leadership collapses. And that's why we find that in 20 years, after nearly $20 trillion, most of the roads that were bad in 1999 are still bad all over the Federation. Look at the quality of infrastructure, look at the quality of education, look at the lifestyle of the people, look at per capita income. We are heading downhill and we've been heading downhill. But within the same period, some people in public office have also become multi-billionaires. So the resources of the state meant for development, when you're told that the primary purpose of government is security and welfare of the people, these are the two things that have suffered most in Nigeria. So if the primary purpose of government has been defeated for 20, and it's not about a Buhari government. Even when you speak of APC today, how many of the dominant people there were not PDP people? So that distinction is tenuous and a little dishonest because it's the same political elite working with the same template on both sides. Was there rigging during, before this current government? Very impressive rigging. And you also have a political elite that has not managed to learn the process of winning elections, the way it's done in civilized politics. And so this is a learning season. And those complaining, were they also not rigging?
Two things that you've raised. I mean, that's a very valid question to ask us to whether you were outrigged or
or you did, or you lost.
I was watching an advert, and someone said, "I cheated." I mean, he was accusing his colleague of having cheated, and he said, "Oh yes, you cheated as well. It's just that I cheated better than you." So we don't know what the situation really is. But let's take a look at voter apathy. You've said something about reversing the democratic order, and it's very disturbing. Would you put it down? Would you put down the apathy we saw during the supplementary elections to people being distrustful or being tired? Looking for the right words now. Are they being distrustful of the process or didn't understand the process? I'll give you an instance. So on Friday, we opened our studios here to conclude to talk about the supplementary elections. We ran most of Friday and all of Saturday and most of, if not all of, yesterday as well. And one of the things on the reports that came to us from Bauchi State was that the electorate were confused and they were wondering, elections for what? We thought we had done, the presidential and then the governorship elections.
So what are we voting for?
What are we voting for again? So they had quite a bit of a challenge explaining to the people that, oh, this is what you're
Who had the
for.
challenge?
Well,
INEC?
first and foremost, the journalist had to explain what he or she was trying to find out from the people, and then maybe INEC wasn't communicating enough. But how would you, where would you place the voters in all of this? Can we say we have just one explanation for the reason for a really poor showing of voters?
There are
during
several
the supplementary
reasons,
elections?
and we spread the blame. It was no business of the journalists to tell the voters what was going on. They are members of a political party. So for them not to even be aware there's elections, that tells you there was no political party, no political engagement, no political interface, that they're just recruited to vote, and that is it. Without even the effort and decency to say it continues. So that tells you that the foundation for a democratic culture is not being nurtured, and it doesn't exist. That's
Whose
all.
responsibility is
The
that?
political party is primarily, if I'm a member of a Labour Party, and I do not know their supplementary election where somebody from my party is taking place, what kind of politician am I? What kind of political party is that? So it's primarily the business of parties to educate their people about, look, we're struggling for this. INEC also has the duty to inform the people we're about to organize this on so day for this reason. And then the security agencies are organized for it. So at the level of, at several levels, so apathy, first, the matter of the degree of involvement of the people in a genuine democratic process. Secondly, the crisis the fear arising from the crisis of the previous elections that made some people think that they had no need to lose their lives. Genuine fear about personal security. And lastly, is the question of, would it really matter? They will go and write what they like. So those are the three issues on the table. And those, yeah, we can look at them distinctly across those three divides.
Well, the process was quite lengthy. If I recall clearly, it started in February, so to speak. We're talking about presidential elections, and then they were shifted, and then we started to vote for presidential elections, and then we did governorship elections. I mean, even for the presidential elections, they were not concluded on one day. Some places did not get voting materials on time, so it concluded the following day. People assumed that the governorship perhaps would be better planned. It was the same story, and now we had inconclusive elections, and they had to be shifted by another 2 weeks to be. It was a pretty laborious process, if you ask some people.
Tedious, tedious and wearying. But let's also go back and maintain a sense of history. In the elections that brought in President Buhari, there was also postponement. At, what do you call it? INEC had declared itself ready, but at the time INEC said that over 500,000 cards, in the case of one state, I think Edogun, had not been delivered. The bulk of voters' cards that people collected, close to, well, not the bulk, close to 47% came after what would have been the date of the elections. So INEC wasn't actually ready at the time. So that in discussing the current crisis, we don't assume that INEC's problems have just begun. That's one. Two, the logistical challenges, many of them were really avoidable because if we want to be frank in the analysis, we must say that INEC started preparing after the last elections, which was 4 years ago, and not about February. Look back to when the budget was approved for it. That was more than enough time. Then look at the logistical challenges that came up later. We learned some of them, most of them were caused by politicians that led to the postponement, whereby you had materials that were supposed to go to Enugu going to, I think, Port Harcourt. And that occurred in many places. And there were reports, I'm not in a position to confirm them, that after they were deployed, that the pilots or the planes carrying it were given counter instructions by agents of forces not traceable to INEC, and they had to comply because they came from superior authority. So it would seem to be that there was organized attempt also to make the process irregular, in a manner of speaking.
I wish we could be talking about bettering elections, but, you know, Ayo has a question for you from Lagos.
Yes, I'm hoping that we'll be able to make the elections better as well, Mokwe, but there's a question I would like to ask our guest this morning. It'll in about 17, well, in precisely 17 states as well as the FCT. There were elections held into state assembly, legislative constituencies and all of that, and just 4 states had elections, supplementary elections into the governorship posts. It would seem like not much attention was given to the parliamentary elections generally. What do you see that as a danger, or you think it's something that is okay, given the importance of the legislature in all that we do?
No, I believe that enough attention was given to the accompanying parliamentary elections, but that the reportage focused on the governorship supplementary elections. I would want to make that distinction. But when we speak of enough importance, if I'm contesting, for me, that's the only thing happening, not the governorship. And for my supporters, that's the only thing happening. But given the perception and structure of power in Nigeria, where over the last 40 years, when people speak of government, they think of the executive arm, you can then understand why the reportage, media reportage, elite attention, business attention was focused on offices, on elective, on executive offices. So I believe it's more of the reportage than the fact of, okay. You know, so that's my take. Yes, it's not that, it's a matter of where was attention focused.
Okay, and
not that it's not that people were not. People still came out to vote for the what do you call it? For the legislators who were on the supplementary election.
But then, if you also look at it, it would seem like, because from what you have said now, if reportage is not giving attention to the legislature, so to speak, what does that portend for the legislature?
No, first of all, what it says about our democracy, I'll move from that to what it portends for the legislature. What it says about our democracy, about citizen awareness, about even media maturity, is that even our media needs to maintain a holistic picture of the electoral contest and the electoral process and what has to be reported. So at that level, citizen enlightenment suffers because by reporting mostly the executive electoral engagements, you're actually re-emphasizing to the consciousness of majority of the people that it's about who becomes governor or president. So the media interface should change its perspective. Then on what it portends for our democracy, well, it will still reinforce that impression that politics is about the executive. And the danger there is that it makes people overlook the need to query, question, or interface with their representatives. And our site, let's suppose I'm a senator. At the end of every month, I take home 13.5 million naira. In addition to 200 million naira per annum as constituency project, if you divide that, that's nearly 20 a month. If you check everything I take in a month, I'm probably walking home with 30 to 40 million every month. And you may find I don't have a constituency office, or if I have, it's one ramshackle place with an underpaid girl or boy sitting there. So you see that the resources of the Nigerian state goes to individuals who live big in the midst of poverty and who feel no compunction, and for whom the people have also no concern and don't feel the need to query. So if we keep focusing and on the executive and de-emphasizing the duties of our lawmakers, who actually are genuine representatives by contact and proximity, we are deepening an undemocratic culture. We are deepening and strengthening lack of accountability, because we then are not making the people realize that these guys ought to be queried about what they are doing. The laws you're making, for whom? Have you consulted us? And on issues affecting us and affecting our people? And from there, they will also then see the need to also query their local government chairman. Then you're talking about democracy.
Well, strengthening the democratic process is definitely a topic that we should be, talking about. But it's a topic for another day. It's always a delight to have you here, Mr. Okeke-Chukwu. He's the Executive Director, Development Specs Academy, and also a Senior Fellow at the INEC Business School. Thank you for coming on the program this morning.
My pleasure.
Sunrise Daily continues in a moment. Please stay with us.